Welcome to the Black on Black Education Podcast, where we interview the most brilliant minds
and connected hearts to discuss our shared passion for the transformation,
the revolution,
reimagining,
and recreation
of education in the Black community.
My name is Eva Lorraine Jean Charles, founder of Black on Black Education and New York City high school teacher.
And I'm Jamal Thomas, her partner and dad, education enthusiast.
And we're your hosts. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.
And most importantly, to enjoy the episode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Black on Black Education Podcast. I am very, very excited about this one. I know it's going to be a rich discussion. And so please fill the people in. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
Hi, I'm Dr. Courtney Rose. I am, here come the titles. I am a Miami-based teacher educator. So I'm a university-based teacher educator, an educational consultant, a writer, et cetera, all the things. And what does it say? Why do I do what I do? I do what I do because it's a part of who I am. This work is something that I spent a good portion of my life running from. I usually say teaching and education was the family business. I come from a long line of either educators or people who worked in school settings. And so I was like, well, I'm going to do something different. And then it just kind of called me. I was a journalism major and not finding any passion and any joy in that. And then I had this moment, this epiphany over one summer, and switched to education major. And I felt my whole body come alive in that first class that I took. And it felt like home, and I never left. So
love it.
Wow. This is a conversation that's been a long time coming. Like we talked, it's been over a year now that, trying to get this thing set up, and now we're finally here. So, I've been looking forward to it, and, checking out your website and stuff. There was a particular quote that I wanted to kind of use to start, the conversation, because it connects so closely to things that we've talked about in the future. So I'm just going to say the quote, and then let you completely, run with why you chose to have that as such a part of the forefront of your site where you're communicating to the world. So the teacher is, of course, an artist, but being an artist does not mean that he or she can make the profile, can shape the students. What the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for students to become themselves. And I did not put the person who stated. So if you can let us know that too.
Yeah, that is Brazilian educator and philosopher Paulo Freire. And that quote's at the bottom of my personal emails and my work emails. It's everywhere as a reminder to myself of where I need to position myself in this work. I think so much of how the education system or the schooling system, and we can talk about why I'm very particular about using schooling versus education, was to shape the person, right? To produce citizens that met the standard or, were what the country wanted them to be, right?
Yeah.
And that has kind of remained the ethos of our system and of many of the dominant practices and policies and, the things that we are doing and seeing within classroom spaces. And so this quote is a reminder that that's not our job. Our job is not to pour in as much as it is to pull out, right? Our students have so much that they come to us with. And a lot of times the ways that schooling is structured doesn't give us the space or the permission to spend as much time as we need and as much time as they deserve, figuring out those inherent gifts and talents and interests and using them to shape the classroom.
Yeah.
Instead, we ask them to mold themselves to what the classroom and by extension, what society wants them to be.
Absolutely.
And so it's a reframing of the role to shift how we act and how we move and how we engage within educational spaces.
you're in such a unique position to do that with the work that you do, right? Doing consulting within in schools, working with educators and pre-service educators specifically, being focused on the research side of things, and those positions in education don't always get the best rap, right? Like they don't always get the glorifying reviews in terms of the work that they're doing. And so like talk to us about you in each of those buckets, right? And how the way that you decide to show up in that work, how how important it is for the trajectory of the education system, because we recognize that like we need these things to happen. And so just talk about like as a teacher, working in a teacher prep program, being an educational researcher, an author, being a consultant, how do you show up in that work to support the changes that we want to see in education?
In all three of those spaces, I show up as much of myself as possible, right? And that means extremely vulnerable at times. So I bring a lot of my personal experiences into each of those spaces to inform the questions that I'm asking, the readings and other course materials that I assign and when I'm teaching, the ways that I construct workshops and other experiences that I provide through the consulting work. It's all from this, the core of who I am, right? And digging as much into my humanity as possible, right? And I was telling this story to some people in my program about how I was having a really off day. Like I just could not emotionally gather myself. And I walked into my classroom and I was like, okay, we're just going to swallow it and put it to the side and teach this lesson or teach this class. And I couldn't. As soon as I opened my mouth, the tears started coming. And so I decided to invite my students in instead. And I said, something is going on that is really affecting me. I value your time. And so it was important for me not to cancel this class, but I need some time to gather myself. So in this first, 30 minutes of class, I'm going to restructure what I did and I need a moment. Because I'm not okay. And it's important that I'm not okay. Because when you're not okay, I hope that you feel comfortable telling me that so that I can extend the same grace, right? Yeah. And that was really scary to do because who does that, right? Like in a classroom space, who does that? And I just had to. I had to honor myself in that moment and honor my humanity in that moment, and give space for my students to do the same in the future. And so many of them did after that day. Just feel so much safer and more comfortable saying, life is lifing really hard right now, and I'm drowning. And 5 extra days on this assignment would help me to reconnect with myself in a way that I can push forward this semester. Or I'm on the brink of a breakdown and I just need an extra 72 hours. And we were able to just invite humanity into the room in a way that created something really powerful for the remainder of the semester. And that's my goal, is to bring humanity into everything that I do.
And it's so key and so important, and just such a profound story that you shared there, because I can imagine that there were lives changed in that moment. People who think of schooling as calculus and trigonometry and biology and that's what they're coming for, to get to sit down with a teacher who becomes the actually the best version of themselves, where it's just this human to human connection. And it goes back to what you talked about, like schooling versus education. If you can bring out from them the idea that, wow, I don't have to sit here and hold all of this in, these things that are preventing me from actually taking in the information. I can sit down and I can share with my fellow classmates and with my teacher, what it is that's going on in a way that opens up space so that all of us now, walk out of this room feeling a little bit lighter, like that is a whole different, method of looking at, what education is supposed to be. So, I mean, I would actually love to hear you dive a little bit more into the schooling versus education. And maybe it's not schooling versus education. Maybe it's schooling and education. Like, just how do you look at the dynamic of those two words?
Yeah. So, again, I think schooling, I conceptualize it more as this space of learning how to be according to others' expectations and constructions of who we should be. And education being that space where we are being given those tools and the opportunities and the resources to figure out who we want to be. And in many cases, who we already are, right? To self-actualize in that way. And so I actually have my students do this on the very first day of class. They get into groups and they draw one picture that comes to mind when they think of the word school, and one picture that comes to mind when they think of the word education. A lot of them draw the same picture. A lot of them don't. And it's from there that we can decide, are we going to be school teachers or, and essentially work as cogs in a machine that doesn't always make room for diverse perspectives about, what learning can and should look like, what intelligence can and should look like, how to assess people in ways that actually measure what it says it does, right? And on the other side of that, we can be educators, that instead of controlling a space, we are co-constructing a space with the people that we are tasked with teaching. And in many ways, we end up learning as much, if not more, from them throughout the course of that year. I tell my students every semester, I have no desire to create mini Dr. Roses. I'm not that narcissistic of a person, but I am really, really interested in learning who you are and being a part of the process of pushing each other and pulling each other to figure out, what this system is that we've chosen to be a part of and how we can work collectively to create a future that feels good and right and welcoming to as many diverse perspectives and understandings and ways of being as possible.
I mean, I I feel like this happens all the time, and so we just always just name it right in the podcast where we fall into this dichotomy of I'm super excited about education. We have dope educators in the world. We're so inspired, and I know that the future is in great hands. And then going into why doesn't everybody think like this? That cyclical process of being within this system and being one of those change makers in the system and trying to figure out how we keep making these steps toward the sort of education system that we need. And so I just want to name so refreshing hearing the way that you're talking about being a pre-service educator, because I think that your role is extraordinarily important because it exponentially changes the way that education works. It's not just what you do is working with that one school. Maybe that is sometimes when you're working with in your consulting side of things, but the kids that are going to your classroom, you exponentially change and then an exponential amount of students get impacted by the way that those educators are coming into the space. So that is just something that we have to name and think heavily about in these conversations. How are we engaging with pre-service educators to ensure that we're continuing to have these conversations with teachers that are coming into the system? And then when we're thinking about how we educate those teachers that come into the system, this is where I want to kind of get into the next question, where it's thinking about what does a professor that works with pre-service teachers need to cultivate in their classrooms? What and how do they support the development of educators for the educational experience, not that they had, but that students need? in this current landscape?
Yeah, I think the first thing you need to cultivate is trust, right? I think the reason why I lead with so much vulnerability is, and I literally say this to my students, I'm not going to ask you to do anything I wouldn't do in terms of sharing and opening yourselves up and answering hard questions or questions that feel hard because nobody's asked you to answer them before. So I think, I spend about the first month, 4 classes, just building that trust with them, sharing with them as much about me as I ask them to share with me. And in that in and of itself is a model of how to shift a culture in the classroom. I think the second thing would be to create a culture of questioning rather than a culture that, a class culture that's rushing to answers. We end so many of our classes with, well, to be continued, right? Because we're just talking and everyone's making really valid points, but we're not landing on an answer. And I think so much of our society is like, what's the answer? And sometimes there's not one single answer. And so, but it's in the asking different questions, new questions, deeper questions, continue to ask, but why? Yeah, but why? Yes, but why? And continuing to push them deeper into the why of it all really helps them to have some epiphanies that make them see their own K through 12 education so much differently and so much more clearly, and see themselves as they enter that so much differently and so much more clearly. So I think I would say, and then the third is like a collaborative space. It can't be my class.
Right.
I teach the course, I facilitate the course, I provide the space and the resources and all of that, but it's theirs. I'm just lucky to be there a lot of the time. And I tell them that at the end of the semester, it's such an honor to be here with you every week and watch and be a part of this and see you all come into yourselves and see myself come more into myself. I would not be the teacher educator I am today without each and every group of students that I've taught. And I felt the same way about my 5th graders when I was a K-12 teacher. So those would be the 3 things: trust, a culture of questioning, and a truly collaborative space.
You're absolutely, positively talking our language, and you had me in this conversation reflecting on my own, personal educational journey, and it was the idea that I don't want to say I didn't trust my teachers. I didn't think that they were actively trying to harm me or anything like that, but I certainly didn't think that they understood me in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Because what you described in terms of active questioning, I'm a problem. It's just or made to almost feel like I'm a problem, because why was always, I want to know more. I want to know the other angles, and not being able to explore things that way snuffed out like how I felt about school at all. It was as if I don't get to walk through the process of the way my brain kind of works and the way I experience learning. So, hey, I'm gonna go learn what I want to learn, and I'm gonna forget what you guys are talking about. And I just think about what if, and first of all, not just me, all the other kids that are going through, what if they, some of the things that I now struggle with relation to that way of thinking, I still haven't fully figured it out. And school could have been a place that knows that you have minds like mine that are neurodiverse, where you help us to take that energy, which is a lot, and to channel it. And then to your last point, the collaborative point, there's other students sitting in the classroom that they're not going to get a new thought in their life. That's just not what they do. But they'll listen to what I say and be able to sit down with me and work to put it in a sequence and stuff. They're not getting taught how to be that person for the type of person like me. So it's I don't want to say failures all the way around, but of things that in 2022, the world that we know that we're walking into, teacher training programs, PD, it all needs to start to point and funnel in that direction.
And
Oh, sorry.
No, because I'm thinking about the opposite child a little bit more. Because I was the opposite child, right? The education system worked really, really well for me. Like I was good at giving you the right answer. I was good at like giving the essay in the structure and in the format that it needed to be. And so now I'm building a nonprofit organization and I'm building a business and I'm like, but nobody's telling me what to do next. And so like, that gives me a lot of anxiety. Like it gives me and he's dying of laughter because that is literally the day-to-day pain that we go through as partners.
I'm gonna mute myself.
Like it's the day-to-day pain that we go through as partners of him being on the one side of the pendulum and me being on the complete opposite side of the pendulum and really struggling with trying to figure out how I create and map out my own next step and ask the questions I need to ask and find the answers, because I've been so used to someone giving me the answer and me being like, here's the answer back, and I said it nice. And really getting like praised for that and getting A's for that and being summa cum laude for that. And like I was taught that the way that I was able to consume information and regurgitate information and like synthesize and analyze was the way that you were going to be successful. And so now I'm in a space where I have to learn how to be successful very differently, because I haven't been trained to question, to create solutions, to critically reflect on how I plan forward. And so, I mean, it's just that became super clear as we continued to talk through. I was like, oh, is that why I'm like this?
So you used so a lot of times when you hear teacher education, right, see it used interchangeably with teacher prep and teacher training. I don't use the term teacher training. When I read an article or something or see a flyer for something and it's teacher training, I rip it up and I throw it out because I already feel like the place that they're coming from is a place of, let me tell you what to do, how to be, like what the things are, right? And speaking directly to this juxtaposition between you two, so all of my assignments are reflections, every single one, except the group project, but every single one. And I have the Evas who come to me and say, but how do I reflect? Like, what exactly do you want me to say? And they spend the whole time summarizing the articles and the readings because they have to reflect on 3 to 5 readings in the assigned modules. And I always write the same comment. Well, you have told me what this person thinks so beautifully, but I have no idea what you think. I have no idea what you feel. I have no idea who you are. And that's what I want to know. I want to know what you think. I want to know how you feel. Do you agree with this person? Do you disagree with this person? Why? What experiences have you had that shaped out those opinions, those feelings, those perspectives? And they always tell me, it's so hard. Nobody's asked me to share what I think and feel. And to me, that's so sad because we're putting teachers in the classrooms who have never been asked within the context of their own schooling, what do you think? How do you feel? How would you do this? What suggestions would you make? What approaches do you think work? What experiences have you had that help you to see this problem or the solutions to this problem that I can't see? Because I can only see what I can see from my perspective. You have the power, the ability, the gift of being able to see this from a completely different perspective that can expand my world and expand my thinking. And to bottle it up and say, no, tell me what you think I want, what I think the solution is. Like, what do you think I think the solution is? It seems so controlling.
Right.
And so that's why I push my Evas to share what they think, even if it's a struggle. Some people's paper is, I have no idea how I feel about this because I don't know what you want me to think about this. And then I can work with them from there. When a lot of that happens in class, where I put them in groups and I'm like, just debate. Like, just talk about it. Well, what do you want us to talk about? It. Like, just it. Like, but Dr. Rose, what do you want us to say? What do you feel? What do you mean what I feel? And then I just keep asking questions until they give me an answer. And they get very frustrated because they're so used to somebody telling them what they should think, how they should feel. And that, to me, as an educator, doesn't give me anything to work with.
Yeah.
Whatsoever.
Yeah. And it's so deeply like important that more and more people come out of this someone's going to give me the blueprint sort of mindset, because there is no blueprint for the things that don't exist yet. And the things that don't exist yet, the only way to be successful in the sort of economy that we're now existing in is by creating things that don't exist yet. Yeah. And so, like, our education system is genuinely dangerous, particularly to Black and Brown people, because they're not being there's an influx of let's control them even more than we have in the past. Let's control what they're going to do and what their outcomes need to be even more than they have in the past, which is complete opposite of what students need to be successful post graduation.
Absolutely.
And just thinking in terms of, you know, what teachers need, you know, connecting it to what you just alluded to, I can imagine that there being some people who hear your approach and be like, that sounds like a lot of work, because you know, we talk all the time now about, you know, personalized, student-centered approaches to education.
Yeah.
And what you're speaking about is very, very much student-centered. You want to know what this student thinks and what this student thinks and what this student thinks. Now, when you start to come and bring the form to the classroom on what that looks and feels like for the teacher, how do we make it so that is it just, sorry, it's more work? Is it, you know, how do you think about that? You know, from the teacher's perspective, who pushes back a little bit and says, I don't have time to get that granular with each student.
Yeah, I don't have time is the first argument, but and then I'll get to the one that actually comes up even more, but it is more work at first. And I always say at first. It's a lot of work at first, because I mean, I just finished my syllabus for my one of my classes today for fall. It looks so different than from the very first semester that I taught it, because it's literally been a workshop. Like, it's been, you know, a work in progress I've been teaching this class since 2018. So it's literally been a work in progress since fall of 2018. I love it now, and I'm so proud of it and so protective of it. But it was a lot of work to figure out what feels good, what doesn't feel good. To get a lot of student feedback requires a lot of vulnerability, and also like that's actually what I get more is, who cares what the students think, right? Like, this is the class. This is my class, right?
To say, who cares what the student think?
Yeah, like, why are you like, who cares, right? Like, not even who cares what the students think, but this is your class. Like, you know, you're involving them too much, right? And that's the mentality that takes over in the K-12 space as well. And that's also the mentality that happens above teachers, that says we're involving teachers in the decision-making too much, right? And so if I can help my students, my pre and in-service teachers, experience a space that welcomes them and their opinions or thoughts, whatever, and encourages them to advocate for themselves in ways that they haven't been asked to do before, my hope is that, sure, maybe I'm a little exhausted at the end of the semester, but maybe when they get into their job, they not only advocate for their students more, but they're able to advocate for themselves more. Because when I was a first-year teacher, I did not. And it's because I never really got practice doing it. And what that looked like within the context of work, or in the context of a person who is at least socially positioned as the expert, the one in charge, et cetera, et cetera. So it's shifting those power dynamics. And yeah, it does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of work for you to feel comfortable with it as the instructor. And it also takes a lot of work for the students to feel comfortable with it, because it's jarring to them as well. Because a lot of them have had negative experiences. Like you were saying, Jamal, like when you would speak up, you would be the problem. And the people who speak out most and ask, like, I love it. They love it. They love it more than I do. But if they ask me a question and my answer is, I don't know, that's a great question. I've never thought of that before. Like, that question never even crossed my mind. And I'm really fascinated that that question is coming to your mind in this moment while we talk about this particular thing. So,
I mean, this relates to education a little bit, and everything you talked about education, in that it takes out, the idea of you're here pointing down at them, and you're from you know it all because you're the teacher, and it creates an intergenerational conversation where you're walking away better, they're walking away better. You may go talk to your mentor about the amazing thing that your student just said, they're walking away better, all because of the spirit that you created in the classroom, all because of the openness that you created. So
yeah.
I mean, there's just such a need to disinvest from the education schooling as we know it. Like, there's just such a need to divest from that way of thinking. We have to devalue the system to the point where it's obsolete in order for the things to be changed. Because I was talking about this at work the other day, like, there is a need to say, we as a community, whether it's our school, whatever, we no longer value this thing. And because we no longer value it, you cannot continue to package it to us with a pretty bow on top and make us believe that it's going to do something for us or our kids. It's just, it's not. And people have to be like proud and like buck up with enough to say, like, I no longer value the public education, private education, but charter education system in the United States of America. I no longer value it the way that it currently exists. I do value this, and this. And if these things are not this, then we're gonna have to do something else.
Yeah.
And it needs to be that with that much invigoration in our voices and in our decision making, because it's not sustainable to continue doing what we're doing right now. Kids are suffering.
And I think we can go, from everything you just said to a microcosm of that feeling, and it's something that I know you've spoken on before, and it's the idea of like problematic, grades and grading. And I'm gonna give my little minute speech on this, and I talk about the idea that we need to get rid of grades and grades. Grades A, B, C, D, F, and the idea that this arbitrary nature of you need to learn this in this amount of time in this way, and if you don't, then you get an F, and it's big and it's red, and you dummy. And then first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Obviously, you need to have some groupings when it comes, but that person that's in third grade can have such an influence on the person that's in first grade if you don't just create these hard lines that say you're supposed to learn this at this time. And you don't take into consideration what's actually happening in these young people's heads and hearts. So I'd be interested to hear, your reflection on how we might practically start the process that lets the decision makers understand that this is not a radical decision; it's a necessary one.
Yeah, I think so. I show this video throughout the semester pretty early. I think week 3 or 4. And it's Sir Ken Robinson, which my students love that he's a sir. And but it's Sir Ken Robinson, Changing Educational Paradigms, which is exactly what you're talking about. And he's talking to this idea, right, that we organize students by age. And he says, as if the most important thing about them is their date of manufacture, right?
Right.
And it's true, right? I mean, if we even look at how certain you know, and I know there's like giftedness and how, you know, kids' brains, some students' brains or some students process things differently and such. But even that requires that some kids feel out of place until they are deemed gifted or until somebody identifies them as gifted, right? Because there's no process that allows for that to happen before they get into a classroom, and then they're just not fitting, right? And it's like, we have to either define somebody as special in some kind of way, different, right? Like giftedness is a special thing. It's just different, right?
You're gifted, then what are you not? Like,
right. And so that's what one of the debates that we have is like this use of gifted and special education, all these things, the labeling and the way that the current paradigms force us to categorize people internalizes different as either a deficit or different as some kind of superhumanness, right? That you are beyond human or you are less than human in some way. And grades do a very similar thing. I'm not 100% against, you know, I think I'm a qualitative researcher and all these things. And so people think I'm anti-numbers and anti, you know, numerical data and all of that. I'm not. I think when we have the numerical data, and grades to me falls into that space, it tells us something is going on here. I think it's how we use that data that's the problem, right? So if we're using grades to limit students' access to necessary resources and opportunities, it's a misuse of really valuable data. And I think that's where I would start. Not that we need to maybe completely get rid of it, but we need to think about how we're using it and applying it first to make that more equitable. And then we can see, once that's more equitable, do we even need it at all, right? Because that's what's creating this feeling that we need to continue to use it. Because, well, there's kids who are trying hard and kids who are not trying hard. There are kids who, you know, all of these things that are problematic narratives that place the issue in the student versus the structure and practice of the system itself. And so I always start with, sure, this is really valuable data, but are you using it to get the most value from it? Or are you using it to continually say, oh, you're over here, you're over here, you're over there? That's not a useful or valuable use of that information. Valuable use of that information would be, what does this data show us? What does this data show us about what we're providing or not providing? What does this data show us about what our kids are dealing with that we haven't considered in what we've designed here and what we've constructed here? What does this data show us about who we're maybe not attending to that we should be, and who we're over attending to, and how to make that more equitable and more impactful and meaningful? So I think, to answer your question, I would say right now, the question is, are we using all of this data that we have in the form of test scores and grades and all of this in the most valuable and meaningful way as possible? And my answer is absolutely not. And that's what's reproducing these problematic narratives and practices, and students internalizing really false narratives about themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's just so important. And I think to start to like round out our conversation, you're also a researcher, right? You're an author, you're a writer, and talk a little bit about like the work that's being done in the research space in education. And of course, it's not an exhaustive list of all the things that people are doing all over the place. Yeah. But like, talk about some of the things that you're seeing happen in the academy, and like what is going really well and what's not going so well, and what conversations still need to be grappled with from a research perspective, and the way that researchers go about collecting their information, and how those things begin to be a part, because again, we can't alienate any part of how this work continues to happen. Yeah. So now, how do we just come together and make sure that it's effectively happening? And so talk about the Academy's space in this role toward revolutionizing education.
I think Around the time that I was wrapping up my doctorate and like doing my own dissertation work, I think there were a lot of really exciting questions being asked. I mean, my study was on, preparing hip hop educators for the classroom, and that, somebody else did a dissertation, like their whole dissertation was a mixtape that they put together. It was just a really exciting time where questions were being asked from lenses that usually weren't at the forefront, right? Using frameworks that were rooted in experiences and perspectives and understandings of the people that we say the research is being designed to help, and not research created by someone else or frameworks created by someone who just did a lot of research on these people, right? Or on these groups. And so I think that's something that's happening or was happening. Right now, I think the academy, in my opinion, especially when we think about within the space of education and education research, I think a lot of times we don't have a clear identity or a clear vision for the direction that we want to go. And so you have a whole bunch of, Geneva Gay writes about this, a whole bunch of competing agendas, right? And there's never any synergy or collective voice that happens. It's just power, this is going to get the money, this is going to get the money, this is going to, and so everybody's doing what they think is going to get the money. And once that happens, right, it's, what are we doing this research for anymore, right? And so I think that's the battle that I see happening a lot within education, within the academy, within education research is, are we doing what's trendy, or are we doing what's needed, right? Are we asking new questions? Are we asking innovative questions? Are we asking questions from the perspectives of the groups that we claim to want to change the space for? I say a lot of times, so much, whether it's our pedagogical practices and our instructional practices, our education research, whatever, would be so much more meaningful if instead of learning or doing it about groups, we do it with them.
Right.
So,
language.
I don't know if you've been looking at our post and listening to
probably,
what we've been talking about. This is it, man. Like, we are here to serve young people. Mm-hmm. And if you do not start the conversation with how do you best serve young people, then you are starting the conversation in the wrong place. And so, we've been wrecking our brains over the course of the years with this big thing. Black on Black education, we kind of want to be an umbrella company for all things Black education transformation. Yeah. But that's like impossible, like, you know what I'm saying, all at once, you know what I'm saying? And so in thinking about where do you start and where do you focus, we've come to this place where it is personalized student-centered approaches to education, and starting with students deciding what that's supposed to look like. So, Eva, she tells the story better than me, but what are we creating over the course of the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, so we are creating something called the Student Action Board, coming to a school near you very soon. But we're going to be working with a group of about 20 students on, we're going to write a book, and process we're going to do a youth participatory action research study where we're engaging students in the opportunity to think about what are the things that they as individuals, a part of the program, want to see change in education, but also expanding out and creating a research study that is accessing information from students all over the country, a survey that they created, a methodology that they created, data that they analyze, to put together, to give to educators, to give to policymakers, to give to people to understand the qualitative part of what they're feeling. So they're going to write letters letters to education about how it's failed them and the ways it's failed them. And then they're going to write academic articles that tell them about the solutions and the things that they have seen and heard and analyzed with the data that they're getting from students all over the country around like what they want to see. We keep saying that like we need to have student voice, but like student voice on what we already want to do. No, think about how we overhaul this thing by creating a system that matches the needs of the students. They know that they want to see the environment change. They know that they want to become entrepreneurs. They know that they want to be rappers. They know that they want to be basketball players. They know that they want to be moguls. They know that they want to do these things. They know that they want to dance and make music. So we should be creating a system that is allowing for them to do those things and do those things much more often than sit in a room, shut up, do an essay, write a thing. That we need to be teaching them how to leave school being passionate about creating change, because it's going to be the change makers. It's going to be the people who are okay with rustling feathers that actually makes the sorts of things that we want to see change in our society as a whole, but particularly focused in on that education system.
That's so exciting.
And the one thing I'll add to that's going to, be imperative is, all of this data, all of this communication with students, it also will become them advocating directly with policymakers via TikTok, Instagram, poems, essays, all of these various different things. Like, this is what we want to see, Mr. Leader, ma'am, and this is how we want to see it. And really, you know what I mean?
Leader, ma'am.
I was like, I don't know where he was going with
that one.
Leader, ma'am. That's my title.
It was. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to go back to the cards and see what I said. I was just going, but seriously, having it's one thing for policymakers to not listen to me. And not listen to not listening to Dr. Rose. It's a whole nother thing for a kid to come out with something powerful that, what are you going to see? What do you say to that kid? And what do you say to 1,000 kids, 1,000,000 kids, all pointing in one direction on what they want education to look like? You can't tell them no.
And that's one of the things, like, just so you brought it up, that I think as the Academy is starting to open up to, is that we have thousands of kid researchers out there right now who are leveraging spaces like TikTok, like Instagram, like whatever else I'm not hip enough to know about yet, because I'm aging out of being on the know side of things. Okay, I'm finding out. All right. But like, we're not leveraging that enough. Like, one of my students created podcasts from my course assignments, because one of the options that they have is to turn their reflections in as audio recordings. And they're like, well, where do I put them? And I was like, put them wherever. You can just send me the file, or you can put it on like Anchor or Apple Podcasts or wherever you want. Like, put your voice out there. Like, you're an expert, because these are your thoughts. Nobody else is an expert on your thoughts except for you. And they do it. They start YouTube channels. They like do all of these things.
I love that.
And then they blow my, like, I had one student write her autobiography, which is my first assignment. She wrote it as a 7-minute piece on the piano. And so she submitted the recording of the music piece. And then she wrote like a 2-page paper explaining how the piano piece, took us through the journey, her educational and personal identity development journey. I mean, I could never think of that. I consider myself extremely creative, but I cried. I was like, I sent it to everyone I knew, and I was just like, look at what I'm doing. Like, look what my students are doing. Look at what they're doing, because I just
look at what you're cultivating. Like look at what you're cultivating.
It's just
and that, it is something that deserves to be celebrated. And it's just, tell people how they can reach out to you, because they need to be tapped in. Please.
So I'm on Twitter and Instagram, mostly Instagram, but we're getting back on Twitter, at Dr. Courtney Rose. On both spaces, and then my website, which we're bringing her back. We're bringing her back. Okay, she's coming back. The blog's coming back. Everything's coming back.
Love it.
www.ivyroseconsulting.com. So You can even subscribe to be a member there so you don't miss any of the new things, the new resources and information that I'm going to start putting up there in September. So.
Yes.
So that is all. I mean, yes, tap in, and we follow the page, and so you have it on good authority that she stays dropping all kind of bars, and if you've gotten to this point in the podcast, you already know. So this is the point of the podcast where we kind of flip things around and we allow our guest to become the interviewer. And so if you have any questions for Eva, myself, or both, now is the time.
So I'm going to ask my favorite question, which is, how do you bring who you are to your work? Something light.
I feel like Eva normally goes first. I'll go first on this one. And the reality is I don't know how to not bring who I am to my work. Like I wouldn't know how, and that's not always a good thing necessarily. I probably need to be somebody else sometime. But I have a zeal for being a stand and having a significant impact on what education is going to look and feel like. And I don't come from the classical education. I don't got a college degree and things to that effect. But I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of articles, and and I've had a lot of conversations with brilliant people myself. And so you guys make me. I can't go research for research. So I just got to be myself and be curious and be really, really, really concerned. And I feel like hopefully that allows me to just do a little bit to make the space better for our babies.
And for me, it is what it is. Period. Poo. What's good? What do we add? Like I do all of it in the classroom because my students recognize that. It helps my students recognize that who I am is enough, who I am is dope, and who I am is professional, and who I am is smart, and who I am is funny, and who I am is all of these things, and I can be all of those things at the same time. I am oftentimes the smartest person in the room, and being the smartest person in the room does not mean that I have to speak in a different way, talk in a certain cadence, pipe down on a certain thing. No, I can be loud, energetic, rude, I can cuss, and still be smart, still be intellectual, and still be Black. I'm not white. I'm not whitening myself. I'm not white. I'm not doing any of that. I'm being who I am. I'm being authentically me. I'm embracing my Blackness the way that it works for me. And I'm still the person who's supporting you on your educational journey. I'm still the person that is showing up for you and fighting for you and yelling at people in the hallway about how they're treating you, because that's just what we do over here. And so, I bring myself into the classroom by pushing myself to be fearless enough not to hide who I am, because it might make other people uncomfortable. Because honestly, my hope is that the longer that people are around me, they get permission to be more of who they are. Because that's just what the world needs a lot more of, a lot more authenticity, a lot more vulnerability, a lot more fun, laughter. I try to bring those things into a space. And when I can't, I be like, because I'm pissed off today, because many of y'all did the assignment last night, and now I'm mad. And I can bring that part of myself in as well, because I can't be prim, proper, excited, fun, whatever, all the time.
Exactly.
And so
you're human.
I'm a human, and that's how I show up.
That's what I heard from both of y'all's answers, right? Just
being the only human I know how to be.
Yeah. Which shouldn't be a radical thought or a radical thing, but it feels very radical.
Unfortunately, it feels that way sometimes. You want to leave everybody with anything, Dr. Rose?
Yes, I want to leave everyone with this question. As you engage with your students or in your research, if that's a lane you sit in, what future are you preparing for? That's the question.
And you can just mic drop on that, because it's supposed to take them in a bunch of different directions. So we appreciate you all for listening. That is another episode of the Black on Black Education Podcast. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Rose. We really, really, truly appreciate you, and thank everybody for listening.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.